Today we are going to discuss about the properties of saliva. As in my last video we have discussed about the salivary glands. So now we will discuss about the saliva. So first of all, the properties of saliva. So saliva, as we know, is the secretion from the salivary glands which get secreted in the oral cavity, and it is the first juice which get mixed with the food ingested, or we could say digestion starts very first from here after mixing of saliva with the food. So the volume of saliva is 1 to 1.5 liter per day. That we can say that 1 to 1.5 liter of saliva gets secreted in a single day, or if we define it in per minute ratio, then approx 1 ml per minute saliva is being secreted in the oral cavity. It is a hypotonic solution, which means it is the tonicity of the saliva is hypo as compared to plasma. Now the reaction, that is pH of saliva, is slightly acidic. So whenever we talk about the pH of any digestive juice, it is basically the pH which is required for the enzymes within the digestive juice to work on. So every digestive juice have a particular pH which is basically the requirement of the enzymes which is present within that digestive juice to work on. So like here in saliva, the enzyme Ptyalin is present, which can function only in the slightly acidic medium. So that pH is basically the requirement for the enzymes to work on their substrate. So here this salivary pH ranges from 6.3 to 6.8 in normal, but its pH varies with its secretory rate. So whenever its secretory rate is low, then the pH of saliva is in the range of 6.3 to 6.0, we could say it is slightly acidic. But if the secretory rate increases, then its pH becomes somewhat alkaline, that is up to 8. So this is the difference of pH is just because if the secretory rate increases, then there is a lesser time for the ions to get exchanged from the plasma. Therefore the concentration of sodium ion increases uh, just because of that pH variability is there. So if secretory rate is increases, then the pH becomes uh, if the secretory rate increases, then the pH becomes approx 8, and if the secretory rate decreases, then the pH is slightly acidic. And this difference of pH is just because of the difference in the concentration of sodium or potassium in the saliva. Now the major glands which secrete saliva is, as we have discussed in my last video, that the major salivary glands are parotid, submaxillary and sublingual. So out of these, the major source of saliva is submaxillary gland. So 70% of the salivary secretion is from the submaxillary gland, and 25% is from the parotid gland, and 5% is from the sublingual gland. Now the next is composition of saliva. So this is the composition that we have to discuss about for all the digestive juices. So the composition of saliva is, it contains 99.5% of water and 0.5% of solids. That is why it is hypotonic to plasma, because it contains 99.5% of water. So it is a watery secretion. We should here know that saliva is a hypotonic secretion which contains 99.5% of water and only 0.5% is solids. And out of these solids, the organic enzymes, inorganic substances are there, and others substances are there. So gases which are present in saliva are oxygen, carbon dioxide and nitrogen. And if we talk about the organic enzymes, or the enzymes which are present in saliva, then the enzymes present in saliva are amylase, maltase. That amylase is also known as ptyalin enzyme. So this ptyalin is actually the amylolytic enzyme. Amylolytic means it acts on the carbohydrates and it will split the carbohydrates into the simpler forms. So amylase, maltase, which will act, as the name implies, it will act on maltose. So the enzyme is maltase. The next is lingual lipase. Lipase, that is the lipolytic enzyme, and the prefix here used is the lingual. Lingual is used because that this enzyme is being secreted on the surface of the tongue, that is lingual. So this is known as lingual lipase. Then the next is lysozyme. Lysozyme, it is a bactericidal enzyme. Phosphatase, which will break down the phosphatase bond. So the enzyme is phosphatase. Kallikrein. Kallikrein is a proteolytic enzyme which will act on, basically this kallikrein is a proteolytic enzyme which acts on the alpha 2 globulin, which is present in the interstitial fluid, and by acting on the alpha 2 globulin it will lead to the formation of bradykinin, and bradykinin is a vasodilator. So the vessels supplying the salivary glands get dilated by the enzyme kallikrein when it produces the bradykinin by acting on alpha 2 globulin on the interstitial fluid, and thus it enhances the salivary secretion. So kallikrein is a proteolytic enzyme which increases the salivary secretion by vasodilatation. Now the next enzyme is carbonic anhydrase. So these are the major enzymes which are present in saliva. So again I will conclude. The enzymes which are present in the saliva are amylase, maltase. Amylase is also known as ptyalin. So amylase, maltase, lingual lipase, lysozyme, phosphatase, kallikrein and carbonic anhydrase. These are the major enzymes which are present in saliva. Now the other substances which are present in saliva are mucin, which is a lubricating agent. Albumin is present. Proline rich proteins are present. Lactoferrin is present. Lactoferrin is a iron binding compound. So lactoferrin is present. IgA, that is immunoglobulin A, which provides a local immunity. So IgA is present. Blood group antigens are present. So this is important. We could find out the blood group only by examining the saliva too. So if we do not have the blood, then we could find out the blood group also from the saliva, because saliva also contains the blood group antigens. Apart from blood, there are so many body fluids which contains the blood group antigens, in which first one is the saliva. Others are some digestive juices also contain blood group antigens. Semen also, in semen it is also present blood group antigens. So these all are actually the secretors that we will learn in blood group. When I will post a video on blood group, then I will explain it again. So blood group antigens are also present in saliva. Free amino acids are present in saliva. And the inorganic substances which are present in saliva are sodium, calcium, potassium, bicarbonate. Important one is bromide, chloride and fluoride. So bromide and fluoride are also present in saliva. Now other non-protein nitrogenous substances like urea, uric acid, creatinine, xanthine and hypoxanthine are also present in saliva. Glucose is absent in saliva until unless a condition of diabetes mellitus is there in the body. So if the blood glucose level is high, then only glucose will be present in saliva, otherwise glucose is not present in saliva. So this is about the composition of saliva. Now the next is functions of saliva. So अभी तक हमने जितने भी enzymes पढ़े, जितने भी हमने contents पढ़े saliva के, उसी के accordingly there are the functions of saliva. Now we will discuss it by one. So first and foremost function of the saliva is after ingestion of food. So basically it lubricates the food that we ingest in. So it is the first function of saliva is it prepares the food for swallowing, that is the bolus formation. So saliva prepares the food for swallowing, that is bolus formation, dissolves the chemicals so that they can be tasted. So we could say it is also having some gustatory function, because saliva dissolves the chemicals, or saliva converts the food ingested into a solution so that the taste buds can be innervated. So taste buds can only be innervated when the saliva get mixed with the food. So it is also helpful in the sensation of taste. Now digestive function. So as the we know कि it contains some amylolytic lipolytic enzymes, so it also has some digestive function. So the digestion of carbohydrate starts from the mouth because it contains the enzyme amylase or ptyalin. So ptyalin acts on the starch, but here the important thing is it only acts on the cooked food or the cooked starch. So when the amylase or the enzyme ptyalin acts on the starch, it converts the starch into dextrin and maltose. And then maltose is all acted upon by the maltase, which is also present in saliva, and convert the maltose into glucose. So we could say the digestion of carbohydrate starts within the uh, within the oral cavity only, and this is the reason when we continue the chewing for a much longer time, then that sweetness of the then the sweetness of that particular food can be sensed within the mouth just because of the production of this glucose from that starch. Now the next enzyme that is present in the saliva is the lingual lipase, but lingual lipase acts only in the very acidic medium. So it basically acts it basically starts its action only in the stomach. So when this lingual lipase goes into the stomach, then it gets the acidic pH and then only it can be activated. So lingual lipase cannot act in the oral cavity itself. So triglycerides of milk fat is acted upon by the lipase, and which will convert into fatty acid and diacyl glycerol. But this reaction happen only in the stomach, not in the oral cavity, because in oral cavity the pH is not that acidic, which is required for the action of the this salivary lipase, also lingual lipase. So salivary lipase is activated by gastric acid and digests fat after the food is swallowed, and it goes into the stomach only. Now the next function is its role in speech. So saliva moistens and lubricates the soft parts of mouths and lips. So just because of that lubrication, particular articulation can happen, and this thus the saliva has its role in speech. Now the next function is cleansing of teeth and mouth. So from food debris, shed epithelial cells and foreign particles. So basically that saliva is acts as a flushing or the cleansing agent for the oral cavity. So just because of its flushing action and cleansing action, it clears the food debris which or the shed epithelial cells and foreign particles from the oral cavity. So the it has an cleansing action in oral cavity. Now the next is it inhibits bactericidal growth. So lysozyme kills bacteria. Lysozyme that is present in saliva, it kills the bacteria. Proline rich proteins, which is also a content of saliva, has antimicrobial properties and neutralizes the toxic substances like tannins. So this proline rich protein in saliva acts against the tannins. Lactoferrin, which is also a content of saliva, binds and transports the iron and arrests bactericidal multiplication. So just because of all these substances, saliva possesses the bactericidal function. IgA, which has antibacterial and antiviral action, it is also present in saliva. Mucin protects mouth by lubrication of mucous membrane. Proline rich proteins and lactoferrin protects the teeth by stimulating the enamel formation. So this is the bactericidal function of saliva. Now the proline rich protein, this is very important, so you all should know this, that the proline rich proteins maintains the oral pH at 7. At this pH, saliva is saturated with calcium, therefore teeth do not lose calcium to the oral fluids, thus it protects the teeth enamel. Though the proline rich proteins हैं, ये ओरल कैविटी के पीएच को 7 पे मेंटेन रखते हैं. तो जस्ट बिकॉज ऑफ द प्रेजेंस ऑफ दिस प्रोलिन रिच प्रोटीन, जो ओरल कैविटी में जो पीएच है वो एसिडिक नहीं हो पाता है, और एसिडिक नहीं रहता है, हम कह सकते हैं एक तरह से न्यूट्रल पीएच पे रहता है. तो इस पीएच पर जो कैल्शियम है वो सलाइवा में सैचुरेटेड रहता है, और इसीलिए टीथ से, बिकॉज वी ऑल नो कि जैसा प्रेशर ग्रेडियंट होगा उसके अकॉर्डिंगली आयंस जो है वो एक साइड से दूसरी साइड में रन करते हैं. तो जस्ट बिकॉज ऑफ दिस pH द सलाइवा गेट कंसनट्रेटेड विद कैल्शियम, और इसीलिए टीथ से या एनिमल से कैल्शियम जो है वो सलाइवा में आने की ज़रूरत नहीं होती है, इसीलिए जो डिपोजिशन है कैल्शियम का वो मेंटेन रहता है टीथ में. सो प्रोलिन रिच प्रोटीन्स मेंटेन्स द ओरल pH एट 7, एंड एट दिस pH saliva is saturated with calcium. Therefore, teeth do not lose calcium to the oral fluids, and thus it protects the teeth enamel. Now, the saliva also possesses some excretory function. So, excretion of organic and inorganic substances like mercury, lead, thiocyanate, and some viruses like rabies and mumps, they also get secreted in saliva. So, saliva also has some excretory function. Now, the next is regulation of body temperature. As we all know, just heat also get lost through the saliva, so it also has its function is regulation of body temperature. Regulation of water balance, as we all know, whenever there is the condition of, because saliva is a hypotonic solution, so obviously it is containing so much of water, so it is also actually maintaining the water balance in the body, and it is quite evident whenever there is a condition of dehydration, then the first symptom appears on the oral cavity, that is the dryness of the oral cavity, just because of the decreased secretion of the saliva. Thus it actually maintains the water balance within the body. So regulation of water balance is another function of the saliva. Salivation decreases with decrease in water content, and this causes dryness of mouth and induces thirst. Now the kallikrein, as I have already discussed, basically kallikrein is a content which is present in the saliva, and it is a proteolytic enzyme, and it acts on the alpha 2 globulin which is present in the interstitial fluid. जो interstitial fluid में alpha 2 globulin है उस पर कैलिक्रिन एक्ट करता है और ब्रेडिकाइनिन प्रोड्यूस करता है, और ब्रेडिकाइनिन जो है वो अपने आप में एक वैसोडाइलेटिंग एजेंट है. तो जब ब्रेडिकाइनिन बनता है कैलिक्रिन के एक्शन से, then this bradykinin basically dilates the blood vessels which supplies the salivary glands, और जब salivary glands को सप्लाई करने वाली blood vessels dilate करती हैं तो salivary secretion increase करता है. तो basically kallikrein increases the salivary secretion. The next enzyme which is present in saliva is ALP, which is a hydrolase intracellular enzyme that participate in metabolic processes of cell, and rise in salivary ALP level reflects the inflammation and destruction of the healthy tissue, suggesting it is a clinical biomarker. Now the next enzyme which is present in the saliva is carbonic anhydrase enzyme or the gustin. It may play a role in reversible hydration of CO2 through it. कार्बोनिक एनहाइड्रेस का बहुत ज़्यादा फंक्शन नहीं है हालांकि यहाँ पर, बिकॉज कार्बोनिक एनहाइड्रेस जो है वो सबसे ज़्यादा एक्टिव रहता है within the RBCs, but it participates in maintenance of approximate pH, homeostasis on tooth surfaces, as well as in the mucosa of GIT canal. Now the next topic which we should learn here is the regulation of the secretion of saliva. As we all know that the salivary secretion is under the influence of parasympathetic and sympathetic supply, but here we should know that the parasympathetic supply increases the salivary secretion to a much greater extent than the sympathetic one. So it is controlled by the parasympathetic system through the facial and glossopharyngeal nerves, which promotes continuous secretion to maintain a moist oral cavity, and the sympathetic system which prevent the secretion by causing vasoconstriction resulting in dry mouth. Saliva is thick and rich in organic constituents. So यहाँ पर जो ध्यान देने योग्य बात है वो ये है कि सलाइवरी सिक्रीशन इंक्रीज होता है जब पैरासिम्पथेटिक स्टिमुलेशन होता है, और उसमें जो प्रोसेस है वो क्या है, वैसोडाइलेटेशन. तो सिंपथेटिक स्टिमुलेशन, पैरासिम्पथेटिक स्टिमुलेशन से वैसोडाइलेटेशन होता है, और इसीलिए सलाइवरी सिक्रीशन जो है वो प्रोफ्यूज होता है, वाटरी होता है. बट जब सिंपथेटिक स्टिमुलेशन होता है तब वैसोकॉन्स्ट्रिक्शन होता है, इसीलिए जो सलाइवरी सिक्रीशन है वो डिक्रीज रहता है और थिक और रिच इन ऑर्गेनिक कंटेंट्स रहता है. Now there is the reflex regulation. So reflex regulation is in two parts, that is unconditioned reflex and conditioned reflex. तो यहाँ पे नाम से ही समझ में आता है अनकंडीशन, जहाँ पे कोई कंडीशन अप्लाइड नहीं है. सिर्फ क्या कंडीशन है कि जैसे ही माउथ में या टंग पर कोई भी फूड प्लेस होता है वैसे ही तुरंत जो है वो सलाइवरी सिक्रीशन इंक्रीज हो जाता है. दिस इज नोन एज अनकंडीशन रिफ्लेक्स, और वी कुड से इट इज़ द इनबॉर्न रिफ्लेक्स विच इज प्रेजेंट सिंस बर्थ. सो इट डज नॉट नीड एनी प्रीवियस एक्सपीरियंस, इसके लिए प्रीवियस एक्सपीरियंस की कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है. सलाइवेशन स्टार्ट्स व्हेन एनी फूड इज प्लेस्ड इन द माउथ ड्यू टू स्टिमुलेशन ऑफ द नर्व एंडिंग इन द म्यूकस मेम्ब्रेन ऑफ ओरल कैविटी. दिस इज नोन एज अनकंडीशनड रिफ्लेक्स. And the next one is the conditioned reflex. So conditioned reflex is acquired by experience. Just like जिसके लिए ओरल कैविटी में खाना रखने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, जस्ट यू आर मेमोराइजिंग सम ऑफ योर favorite dish and you started salivation, or we smell some delicious food and then it salivation get started. So this is actually the condition reflex. So here the condition applied is the previous experience that you associate with that particular sense. So this is known as the condition reflex. So it is not present since birth because it is acquired by the experience, by the previous memory that you have created with some sort of flavors or some sort of smells. So presence of food is not necessary to elicit this reflex. Stimuli for this are sight, smell, hearing or thought of the food, and this is known as the conditioned reflex. Now the applied physiology regarding this, so there can be two conditions, that is the hyposalivation or hypersalivation. So hyposalivation is whenever there is decrease in secretion of the saliva. So this can be due to some temporary reason or this can be due to some permanent reason. So the temporary reasons behind the hyposalivation is emotional conditions like fear, बिकॉज जितनी भी इमोशनल कंडीशंस हैं उन सब में सिंपैथेटिक स्टिमुलेशन जो है वो सुपरवीन करता है, जस्ट बिकॉज ऑफ दैट सलाइवरी सिक्रेशन गेट डिक्रीज. इन फीवर में ऐसा क्यों होगा? क्योंकि फीवर में डिहाइड्रेशन जैसी कंडीशन होती है, टेम्परेचर इंक्रीज रहता है, टेम्परेचर इंक्रीज है तो ऑब्वियसली वाटर लॉस ज़्यादा है, इसीलिए इस कंडीशन में भी हाइपोसलाइवेशन है. डिहाइड्रेशन की कंडीशन में भी हाइपोसलाइवेशन है. परमानेंट रीजंस क्या हो सकते हैं हाइपोसलाइवेशन की? इफ देयर इज साइलोलिथियासिस. साइलोलिथियासिस इज बेसिकली द ऑब्स्ट्रक्शन ऑफ द सलाइवरी ग्लैंड डक्ट. तो जिस डक्ट के थ्रू सलाइवरी ग्लैंड ड्रेन कर रहे हैं, अगर वहाँ पर कहीं किसी में भी कुछ क्रिस्टल या किस तरह का जो हम कह सकते हैं स्टोन फॉर्मेशन हो जाए, वहाँ पे ऑब्स्ट्रक्शन हो जाए, तो उसके कारण क्या होगा, जो सलाइवरी सिक्रेशन है वो ओरल कैविटी में नहीं आ पाता है. देन दिस कंडीशन इज नोन एज सियालोलिथियासिस. एंड नेक्स्ट कंडीशन इज द कॉन्जेनाइटल एब्सेंस और हाइपोप्लाजिया ऑफ द ग्लैंड्स. अगर कॉन्जेनाइटल एब्सेंस है या हाइपोप्लाजिया है सलाइवरी ग्लैंड्स का, देन also there will be the permanent condition of hyposalivation. Next is the Bell's palsy, that is facial paralysis. तो फेशियल पैरालिसिस के कंडीशन में भी जो सलाइवरी ग्लैंड्स है वो स्टिमुलेट नहीं होंगे, इसीलिए सलाइवा का सिक्रेशन कम होगा. Now the next condition is the hypersalivation. So whenever there is increase in the secretion of saliva, like in pregnancy, it is the physiological hypersalivation condition. Synonyms of hypersalivation are tylism, sialorrhea, sialism or sialosis, and the causes are decay of tooth or neoplasm, disease of esophagus, stomach and intestine, cerebral palsy, mental retardation, cerebral stroke, Parkinsonism. इन सभी कंडीशन में hypersalivation मिल सकता है. So this is all about saliva. Thank you.